Welcome everyone, Christine here with my campaign analysis of Skarsnik in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. A campaign that was reworked with 6.0 with the Omens of Destruction patch and has been vastly improved as a result of it. I was never a big fan of Skarsnik's campaign, but I think Creative Assembly has really done quite a bit in order to make the campaign experience more unique and more interesting. In fact, one could reasonably argue that this is the best greenskin campaign at the moment. At the very least, if you're into Mork. Personally, I'm a bigger fan of Gork, so that's why I prefer Grimgor, and I just think like Grimgor's campaign is better even though it doesn't have the same unique campaign mechanics as Skarsnik. So let's just consider what Skarsnik has to deal with, starting position-wise. He starts at war with the Bloody Spears, the same faction that Thorgrim starts at war with. Now, the faction leader over here is right next to Thorgrim, so you will not be able to get a confederation until this faction gets wiped out. Even if you don't attack this faction, Thorgrim will wipe them out very, very quickly. So that's not a game plan. On top of that, you have pretty much a guaranteed early game war to deal with over here with regards to Thorgrim. But you are actually in a better position than he is in quite a few ways. Because he starts with the tier 1 settlement, you start with a tier 2 settlement, you have a better unit variety availability from the very beginning of your campaign, even if you don't own DLC. Well, you do need to own DLC to play this campaign, but you get Nasty Skulkers, you get Night Goblin Archers, you get Goblin Big Boss from the beginning of your campaign, and you can get a bunch of different heroes over here very quickly, be it a replenishment with the Giant River Troll Hag, or if you do own Omens of Destruction, you can get access to Squig Cages and get access to the Night Goblin Big Boss. This is significant because he gives you increased mobility. But there's another factor as well to consider with regards to Skarsnik. They changed the landmark that he has in his initial province, or the Brightstone Mines. They changed them in such a way that you can get squigs cheaper with a higher unit mass, so that's pretty substantial. And crucially, you can get colossal squigs at tier 3. Otherwise, you need to get tier 4 in order to recruit them. Now, of course, you can get Mangler squigs and Goblin Squig Coppers at tier 2 for a regular building, so the benefits here are not necessarily substantial. But that extra unit mass, that lower upkeep, that increased recruit rank, it's certainly a nice benefit. The way I would play this campaign is I would certainly get this building pretty quickly, and then when I'm transitioning to tier 3, I would transfer to the Brightstone Mine and get other things as well. So that's just the start of the campaign, the initial dynamic that you have to deal with. You have the ability of recruiting a lot of troops, and you have a significant amount of flexibility, actually, in terms of how you tackle Thorgrim. If you start a war with Thorgrim, it would be a different discussion, but the fact that you don't start a war means that you can get the jump on him. You can set up an ambush, you can just attack him directly. Hell, you can even bypass his main army and just march on Karak directly and eliminate his initial unit recruitment and really cause a lot of issues for Thorgrim. So that's just the starting dynamic that you have to deal with. You do have Tretch to the east of you. That can be a problem because, Skaven. Inherent issues dealing with Skaven. You can't trust them. You do have Gorbad to the south, and due to the Greenskin Confederation mechanic, you can pretty much guarantee an early game confederation with regards to Gorbad. Now, I personally think Skarsnik's campaign mechanics are actually much better than Gorbad's campaign mechanics. The plan is not as good as Skarsnik brand of bullshit. But here's the thing about Gorbad to understand. He actually has a really, really good Lord skill line. Like, his faction mechanics not so great, but his Lord skill line, his Lord effects, his special skill line, his combat ability, those are a different story altogether. So getting access to Gorbad very quickly is a nice benefit. But furthermore on this subject, you also have the benefit as Skarsnik in that you're kind of in a central position between a number of greenskin Legendary Lords. So you have Grumgor, that he's to the east, he's not too far over there. You have Azak to the north, who's going to buy you time by dealing with Ungrim or keeping Ungrim occupied. Though one of the issues you're going to have to deal with in the course of this campaign is dealing with the situation over here in the south, or your initial locations, fast enough so that Ungrim just doesn't start showing up with massive swarms of forces, because he will eventually. So you just got to be concerned about that aspect. Unfortunately, you can't go to the north because you start with a non-aggression pact with these greenskins. Otherwise, one of the smart plans would actually be to go deal with Ungrim over there. Because you might rely on Gorbad to keep Forgrim occupied. And I think, like, in some ways, like, Ungrim is actually the bigger threat than Forgrim. Partly because Slayers can inflict a significant amount of damage, and they're not worth recruiting for you as a player in a lot of ways, but the AI, with all its cheats and all its benefits, it's a different discussion. And dealing with swarms of Slayers is nastier than dealing with swarms of Dwarf Warriors, suffice to say. But that's just the strategic situation and the kind of options. Obviously, one of the principal goals, and one of the principal early game goals, is to retake Karak 8 Peaks as Skarsnik. Now, when you are playing Skarsnik, there will be a passive army over here in Karak 8 Peaks, but it's going to be a pretty substantial army. Due to the nature of sieges, this is actually not really a difficult battle. So if you're playing Belagar, if you're playing Skarsnik, you can manage this by playing an offensive siege. And that means you can't really gain this army, unfortunately. That is over here because it is a pretty substantial army. But when you do gain it, when you do gain Karak 8 Peaks, you do gain some very substantial benefits. So let's go over those kind of benefits. One of the key elements in Skarsnik's campaign is that before Omens of Destruction, he could not recruit orc units unless he made a building specifically in Karak 8 Peaks, and he could only recruit from there. Heroes he could recruit normally. That wasn't the problem. But orc units, that didn't work out. Now, what they've done is they've disabled the orc building chain, so they split up the goblin recruitment building compared to the orc recruitment building. And you cannot get any of these orc recruitment buildings unless you have Karak 8 Peaks. Keep in mind that this also applies to confederation with other greenskin Legendary Lords. If you confederate, say, Gorbad or Azag or Grimgor, those buildings will just get eliminated. So you might want to first get Karak 8 Peaks before confederating any of them. Because orc units, well, you can make it do very well as goblins, especially as Skarsnik, by having things like Black Orc Big Bosses, and Black Orcs are certainly an advantage in campaigns. And it's not just the infantry, it's also the cavalry. Think of like Orc Boar, Biggins, that kind of stuff, right? So you got to consider that dynamic in a Skarsnik campaign. That is, however, a significant improvement compared to where it was before. So you previously had a unique building chain in Karak 8 Peaks where you could recruit orc units, but it was really bad because of limited recruitment slots. You could only do it in Karak 8 Peaks, and it took a very long time. Now, however, if you do gain Karak 8 Peaks, you start with the Lord Recruit rank and control benefit, and recruit rank for goblins and goblins, +2 faction-wide, or all characters. This then becomes a leadership benefit, which is actually very useful for goblins. Because one of the problems with goblins is their leadership problem. Having 10 leadership is an immense value of leadership to work with. That is at tier 4, though. And then finally at tier 5, you get 20 leadership. That's pretty insane. But you also get +4 Lord Recruit rank, +4 recruit rank for goblins and goblins, and a significant unit experience gain per turn +50 faction-wide for all units. That means you can get some very experienced units if you are playing as Skarsnik. But that's just only one of the benefits that Karak 8 Peaks does provide you. beyond the orcs, beyond the special landmark that you get over there only as Skarsnik, you gotta consider faction effects as well. So faction effect wise, you get 100% character experience gain. So Skarsnik can make hero stacks work exceptionally well because he's leveling those heroes faster. He has a hero actions cost of minus 50%, but that's not necessarily too important. But then he has a plus 15% ambush success chance and a minus 20% upkeep for goblins and squig units. It used to be a significant goblin benefit, but now it's a squig benefit as well. Essentially, this means that you can maintain cheaper Mangler squigs, colossal squigs in this particular campaign. But it goes further. See, if we look at Skarsnik and his Lord effect, he has stock stance for his army, leadership for Night Goblins, melee defense for Night Goblins, his WA. Well, if we do take control of Karak 8 Peaks, so I'm just going to use the console command, the Confederation console command to just do it over here. If we take Karak 8 Peaks over here, we now have stock stance for all armies faction-wide. Of course, we do also get the orc recruitment building and all that, the landmark, but the significant benefit is we get stock stance for every single army with a plus 15% ambush success chance in this campaign. But there's more to also consider in this. You also have the cunning trait. So if we look at greenskin traits, like I'm just going to use the load save character system. So if we look at this, you also get an ambush success chance of 10% in a locally owned region. With 15%, that's 25% ambush success chance if you have the cunning trait. That is a fairly huge ambush success chance benefit that you can utilize in this campaign. And then you got to consider Night Goblin War Boss, who also gives you a plus 15% ambush success chance. So you're looking, if you get cunning, and I'm pretty sure Night Goblin War Bosses can also get cunning, you're looking at a really crazy ambush success chance over there. So, because you get 15%, 15% with 10% from cunning, 25% with 15% from Night Goblin War Bosses, you're looking at plus 40% ambush success chance with Night Goblin War Boss armies. And this is important for stock stance because stock stance is ambush attack stance. It allows you, when you're setting this up, it allows you to attack an enemy force and have a chance of ambushing them. And it's a pretty high chance by default for Skarsnik. But having every army work like this is essentially the Leaf and R campaign for greenskins. And in a lot of ways it's better than a Leaf and R because you don't have the same limitations that Leaf and R has in terms of climate and all that. But one of the substantial benefits of a Leaf and R's campaign is the fact that he does have that stock stance. He has an underway ability as well. He can get a very high ambush success chance. Well, this is the equivalent for greenskins, which at the moment are better race than high elves. And while you don't have the same range nonsense as a Leaf and R, so you don't have Shadow Warriors, Shadow Walkers, you do have a bunch of benefits. An ambush of squigs against an enemy is going to be pretty damn nasty against an opponent. So those are some very substantial benefits that Skarsnik does have. But there is, of course, some other considerations to be made as well. So the one problem that Skarsnik always had is he had a bunch of these benefits for ambushing, but he was never really able to utilize them. Because if relying on ambushing, like ambushing was always very situational unless you have the stock stance. If you have the stock stance, why wouldn't you use it? You can use a regular stance. It is a bit awkward to remember that yes, you do have to switch every army into the stock stance because it is not permanent faction effect. If you lose control of Karak 8 Peaks, you're going to lose the effect, so keep that aspect in mind. But he has a bunch of benefits with regard to ambushing, like melee attack during ambushing, Night Goblin benefits, those kind of things, right? But he was never fully able to utilize them. So having stock stance is a very, very nice benefit. So you have this really powerful situation where you can get swarms of cheap goblins and squigs, and you can use them very effectively in ambushes. You can also use the entire greenskin roster and still ambush quite effectively with it. It depends on the army leader that you do have available for Skarsnik. There are, to be sure, some issues that do exist with Skarsnik. Specifically, his Lord skill line just isn't really the best in the world. His special skill line, that is. So you do get a bunch of buffs. So you get Spirit of the Bad Moon, Fermented Fungi, so buffs, debuffs, that's good. You do get Smart Hiding, so speed, physical resistance, and stock. That's pretty solid. Post-battle chance of stealing a magic item. Armor-piercing weapon damage +6 during ambushes, and leadership during ambushes. But keep in mind, these are not faction effects, they're just Lord effects. That's kind of the downside of Skarsnik. He does have some really good stuff available on faction-wide, but his Lord skill line is not really the greatest. However, the fact that he has an inherent stock stance for himself means that if you confederate him, you do get a pretty good army. It used to be the joke that Skarsnik wasn't even worth confederating because he was not worth using in battles. To give you the context of that discussion, you're missing one important thing for goblins, which is Goblin Tide with Night Goblin War Bosses. So if you have a Night Goblin War Boss, you have the Ambusher benefit, but you don't have the Goblin Tide. The Goblin Tide is only available to the Goblin Great Shamans. So worth mentioning that downside. But if you do have the ability of using ambushes very effectively, then things change. One problem with this skill line is the Underboss's skill. So Underbosses is a completely useless skill that you should never get. It made sense in the context of Warhammer 1 and even Warhammer 2, where due to supply lines we would have limited armies and experience work differently. So stealing 25% experience by other lords was actually a net benefit there. But now is a net negative. Because the key to success in a campaign is not to just have one really powerful army, it's to have as many powerful armies as you possibly can. And that means higher ranked lords. To be sure, the Lord Recruit rank that you do gain from Karak 8 Peaks can help with that, but you're really screwing yourself over with regards to it. And besides, your Legendary Lord is always going to be the highest level anyway. So what's the value of getting Mentor if you're taking that 25% experience earned by other lords? It's really, really not worth doing it. You'll get to a point where it's just like completely redundant. So you have a skill that Creative Assembly should rework. That is the one downside in Skarsnik's campaign right now. Some frustration that can be felt with regards to not having, say, Black Orc big bosses and big guns early on in a campaign, as you would in Grimgore's campaign or Azak's campaign or Gorbad's campaign. But at the same time, like, the potential of this campaign is certainly there. The benefit of Gorbad's campaign is you can actually take Karak 8 Peaks much easier than Skarsnik. Which maybe things should be reversed with regards to that. Just pointing out. I think like the one disappointing aspect of the whole Karak 8 Peaks situation is not even the lords themselves. Like Belegar has some issues, to be sure, in terms of his faction effects. Though he has an amazing lord skill line. Like he's the opposite. His faction effects completely worthless until you get Karak 8 Peaks. They're all great for every faction. That doesn't matter. But the upkeep really sucks. However, Belegar's lord skill line, special skill line, is amazing. Easily one of the best in the game. At least from an Empire standpoint, or recruitment standpoint. Skarsnik has a bad lord, or mediocre lord skill line, but a really amazing faction effects. But the one downside of Karak 8 Peaks is like how it never feels like a contest of Karak 8 Peaks. Like, even when you're playing as Belegar, chances are you're not necessarily going to end up fighting against Skarsnik. Like, you might fight against Squeak, but the idea of these three factions fighting each other is very, very rare. So I think, like, if there was anything I would like Creative Assembly to change with regards to this campaign, beyond underbosses, and that's really the one issue, I think, like, they should really change this dynamic of the Karak Peaks race. I think there should be some provincial changes on how they would handle that. But I think Old World did handle that very, very well, compared to how Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, and Warhammer 3 have always handled the Karak Peaks. But that's my perspective on that subject. Let me know what you guys think. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. For what it's worth, pretty fun campaign, but yeah, it just doesn't feel like a race. I'd probably recommend it more in the Old World, because in the Old World Classic mod, where you just have the Old World, not, you know, the Darklands and so on. Because that's where you do really have that contest of Karak Peaks. Stay tuned for more, everyone.